After 10 years of silence, I decided to visit my son. My body was weak, my hands shaking, but my heart carried a small hope that maybe he'd still remember me as his father. I had no money, no family, just the thought of seeing him again before I died. But when I knocked on his grand door and hoped he would be happy to see me, but I was wrong. Before I tell you what happened when he saw me, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe so my story can reach more hearts. After 10 long years, I finally gathered the courage to visit my son. 10 years of silence, 10 years of loneliness, 10 years of wondering if he ever thought about me, if he even remembered the man who raised him with hands that bled to keep him fed. My body was frail now. My knees cracked when I walked, my back curved, my breath short, but my heart still carried something warm: forgiveness. Not because he asked for it, but because I needed peace before I left this world. I told myself it didn't matter what he'd done, what words were said when he left. I just wanted to see his face again, to know my blood still existed somewhere in this cold world. The road to his house was long. I took a bus halfway, then walked the rest. My shoes were torn, and the cold bit into my bones, but I kept going. I remembered the small boy who once ran to me after school, calling me his hero. That memory was enough to keep me standing. When I finally reached the gate, I froze. The place was massive: tall walls, glass windows, shining cars, and guards at the entrance. My son had built a world of gold. While I rotted in silence, I stood there like a shadow outside a palace, feeling small, unwanted, forgotten. The guards looked at me with disgust, maybe thinking I was a beggar. Maybe that's what I was now. An old beggar at his own son's door. They let me through after I told them my name. I don't know what they expected, but when I said who I was, one of them looked confused, almost afraid I ignored it. I just kept walking up the marble path that led to the door. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I imagined him opening the door, smiling, saying he missed me. I imagined him helping me inside, sitting me down, giving me tea, asking how I'd been. I imagined something that would never happen. The door was tall, dark, and heavy. I lifted my hand to knock, but my fingers hesitated. What if he hated me? What if he told me to leave? What if he didn't recognize me anymore? The thoughts stabbed through my chest, but I pushed them away and knocked anyway. The sound echoed like thunder through the silence. My breath came fast, my legs felt weak. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I had waited too long for this moment. The door took a few seconds to open. In those seconds, I saw every year flash before me. Every lonely night, every empty meal, every time I looked at the sky, wondering if he was looking at the same one. I told myself it would all be worth it if I could just see his face again. The face of my only son, my blood, my pride, my greatest failure. When I heard the lock turn, my heart stopped. The door opened slowly, light spilling through the gap. I stood there, my hands trembling, my breath shaking, my eyes filling with tears I didn't expect. And then I saw him. Older now, taller, dressed in wealth. He looked like a stranger wearing my son's skin. For a second, my heart lifted, but it fell just as fast, because what I saw in his face wasn't joy. It wasn't love. It was fear. In that moment, before he even spoke, I knew something was wrong. Something deep. Something dark. I didn't understand it yet, but I felt it. A coldness in his eyes. A guilt that twisted his mouth. A kind of silence that hides the worst truths. I had spent 10 years imagining this reunion, but not once did I imagine my son looking at me like I wasn't supposed to exist. Like I was something he buried long ago. I wanted to speak, but my throat closed. The air between us felt heavy, poisoned. My body ached, but not from age, from realization, from the cruel, slow understanding that I had walked into a nightmare I didn't know was waiting. I didn't know what he had done. Not yet, but I could feel it. In his eyes, in his shaking hands, in the fear that spread across his face like fire. Whatever my son had done, it was worse than hatred. It was betrayal. When the door opened, my son stood there, staring at me as if he'd seen something that shouldn't exist. His eyes widened. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he would collapse. He looked at me the way a man looks at a ghost. His hands trembled, his body stiffened, his breath hitched, sharp and uneven. For a long moment, we just stood there, trapped in a silence that felt colder than death. I thought he would hug me. I thought he would call me father. But he didn't. He only stepped back, eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Fear. At first, I didn't understand it. I thought maybe he was shocked. Maybe time had changed me too much. 10 years can turn a man into someone unrecognizable. My hair was white now, my face covered with lines, my clothes worn thin. I told myself it was surprise. I told myself he was just trying to believe what he was seeing. But the fear didn't fade. It grew. His whole body looked frozen. His lips trembled like he wanted to speak but couldn't. I could see sweat forming on his forehead even though the air was cold. I took a small step forward. He took a step back. My heart cracked. He looked at me the way a thief looks at the crime scene years later. Guilty, cornered, haunted. I could see the truth in his eyes before I ever heard it. He hadn't expected to see me again. He hadn't planned for this moment. I realized then that I was standing in front of a son who had buried his father not once, but twice. Once in memory and once in paperwork. His house smelled rich. Perfume, smoke, and cold air from machines that hummed quietly. I looked past him for a moment, and it hurt to see how much he had built without me. Marble floors, gold frames, polished walls, all of it shining, all of it clean. While I had spent years living in a room that smelled of medicine and dampness, I had built my life working with my hands, and he had built his by erasing mine. I could feel it now. Something dark beneath the surface. He finally moved his lips, but no words came. Just small gasps, quiet and broken. He pressed his hand against the wall as if the world had tilted beneath him. His eyes darted everywhere. The floor, the stairs, the walls, anywhere but at me. I saw fear, shame, panic, and something else. Recognition. The kind that comes when lies meet reality. The silence between us was heavy. My breath came slow, my chest tight. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Every second felt longer than a minute. I tried to smile, but my face wouldn't listen. I wanted to say his name, but the word died in my throat. Something about his reaction froze me. I wasn't sure if I was standing in front of my son or a stranger who had worn his name for too long. He looked like he wanted to close the door. I could see it in his eyes. The instinct to shut me out, to make me disappear again, to bury me one more time. But he didn't move. Maybe he knew it was too late. Maybe part of him wanted to explain, or maybe he just couldn't find the strength to lie anymore. I felt the cold air between us like a knife. That's when I noticed the portrait on the wall behind him. A family photo. Him, a woman I didn't know, 2 small children smiling. He had a new life. A good one. The kind of life I always wanted him to have. But I wasn't in that picture. I wasn't in any of them. It was as if I had never existed. And maybe, in his world, I didn't. That was when I understood what kind of fear I saw in his face. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't confusion. It was exposure. I didn't know how deep the lie went, But I knew it was bad. Something told me I had walked into a truth that was never meant to be found. My son was trembling not because he was seeing his father, but because he was seeing the man he thought was gone forever, the man he had erased to build the life standing behind him. And in that moment, I realized something cruel. My return wasn't a reunion. It was a disaster. My presence wasn't love coming back home. It was the ghost of his crime knocking on the door. The truth didn't come out all at once. It came in pieces, small and sharp, cutting through every part of me that still believed in my son. I found out what he had done the same way a man finds out his house is on fire. Slowly, then all at once. After I stepped into that house, everything felt wrong. The servants avoided my eyes. The woman in the photo never came out to greet me. The children's laughter upstairs stopped when they heard my voice. It was like the walls themselves were whispering secrets I couldn't hear. Yet I sat down in his living room, surrounded by things that once would have made me proud, the paintings, the expensive furniture, the signs of success. But now they made me sick. None of it looked earned. It all looked stolen. I didn't know from who yet, but I was about to find out. He couldn't stop shaking. His hands gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white, body stiff. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. His mouth kept moving, but no words came out. I could see the guilt crawling up his throat, choking him. Then he turned away. He didn't look at me again. He picked up his phone, pacing, breathing too hard. He wasn't calling for help. He wasn't calling for family. He was calling someone to make sure something stayed buried. That was when I knew. Whatever lie he had lived with, it had something to do with me. I could feel it. That sick, heavy truth hiding in plain sight. It took a few minutes before I saw the papers. They were sitting neatly on the glass table beside me, stacked in a folder, half open. I wasn't supposed to see them, but I did. My eyes scanned the top sheet, and the blood drained from my face. It was a death certificate. My name, my birth date, my date of death, 10 years ago, cause, heart failure, witness, my son. It was official, signed, sealed, stamped. I stared at it, waiting for my mind to say it wasn't real. But it was. I was legally dead. My son had buried me on paper so he could claim what wasn't his to take. My hands started shaking, my throat closed up, my body went cold. I kept staring at that paper, trying to make sense of it. Why? Why would he do that to me? I had nothing left, no business, no property, no wife, only him. And he had turned my absence into his opportunity. He forged my death. He erased me to get what I built. The inheritance, the insurance, the land, everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed would keep him safe when I was gone. He took it early. He couldn't even wait for nature to finish what time had started. He killed me on paper and moved on. I wanted to feel angry, but all I felt was hollow. It was like looking at the ruins of a home you built with your bare hands, only to realize your own son was the one who burned it down. I thought of the years I spent breaking my back for him. Every late shift, every cut on my hands, every meal I skipped so he could eat more. I thought of how proud I was when he graduated, how I told everyone my boy would make something of himself. I didn't know that something would be my grave. $5 million. That was what my silence was worth. The papers showed everything. The transfer, the bank approvals, the signatures, the fake witnesses. He planned it carefully. He made sure it looked clean, like I had simply died and left him everything. And the world believed it. I wondered how he slept at night, how he smiled at his children, how he stood in front of that house knowing it was built on betrayal. Maybe he convinced himself I was better off gone. Maybe he told himself it wasn't murder if the man was already dying inside. The cruelty wasn't in the money. It was in the thought. The thought that my son could sit through a fake funeral, sign fake papers, take my life's work, and live 10 years pretending I never existed. That's not greed. That's something darker, something colder. A heart that forgot how to feel. When I finally looked at him again, he was crying. Not because he missed me, but because I was standing there, alive, proof of his crime. He had buried me once with ink and signatures. Now I had come back to dig myself out. I sat there staring at my son, and I could feel the years crashing down on me all at once. 10 years of loneliness, of cold nights, of wondering if I had been a bad father. All of it came back like a storm. The truth was harder than I could bear. He had declared me dead. He had taken my name, my work, my savings, my life, and he had lived comfortably on the bones of my memory. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him why, but no words came out. My chest was tight, and my eyes burned. I just sat there, breathing through the ache, staring at the man I once called my pride. He looked back at me like a cornered animal, shaking, sweating, whispering words I couldn't hear. But his face said enough. It said guilt, it said fear. It said, "You weren't supposed to come back." Memories started hitting me, one after another, like blows. I remembered the last argument we had before he left. He wanted money. I didn't have enough. He called me selfish, said I was holding him back. I told him one day he'd understand that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns. He didn't listen. He slammed the door, and that was the last time I saw him. For 10 years, I thought he needed time to grow, to realize, to come back. I never imagined he'd spend that time erasing me. I raised him to be strong, not heartless. But somewhere along the way, the world taught him cruelty. Or maybe it was always there, hiding beneath his smile, waiting for the right moment to show itself. The walls around us were clean and white, but they felt dirty. Every piece of furniture, every shining frame, every inch of that house smelled like betrayal. I built that wealth with my hands. Every dollar saved, every stone laid, every contract signed. He didn't just take the money, he took my history, my name, my identity. He didn't rob a bank, he robbed a father's grave. And the worst part, he didn't even look sorry. He looked terrified, yes. But not sorry. Fear of being caught isn't the same as regret. I remembered his childhood, the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, the shoes I mended so he could go to school, the meals I skipped so he'd never go hungry. I gave him everything I could. I thought love was enough to protect him from the world's greed. But maybe it was my love that made him weak. Maybe he saw my kindness as a flaw to exploit. Maybe he learned that he could take from me, and I'd still forgive him. And he was right. I came back after 10 years, not to punish him, not to demand anything, just to see him. Even after all of it, part of me still wanted to believe there was goodness left in him. But what I saw in his eyes wasn't love. It was panic. He had taken everything, and yet he looked empty. The more I stared at him, the more I saw the truth. The wealth didn't fill the hole he made by killing his father on paper. He built walls of gold to hide the rot inside. He dressed his guilt in fine clothes and pretended it wasn't there. But guilt doesn't die. It waits. It whispers. It eats you alive slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but shame. I could feel his fear filling the room. He avoided my eyes, pacing, gripping the chair, his breath uneven. He looked like a man standing in front of his own ghost. And maybe he was. Because I wasn't just his father anymore. I was the proof of what he did. The living evidence that his hands were dirty. He couldn't undo it. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't hide from it. All he could do was look at me and crumble under the weight of what he had done. And in that moment, I realized the cruelty wasn't just in the act. It was in what came after. He had lived 10 years pretending his father was gone, and now here I was, alive, breathing, staring at him, breaking the world he built on lies. I could see the regret forming in his eyes, but it was too late. Regret doesn't heal. It just hurts. I didn't say anything I didn't need to. My silence was heavier than words. He knew what I knew, that he had taken everything that mattered, and in doing so, he lost the one thing that could have saved him, his soul. The collapse of pride. He broke down slowly. It didn't happen in one scream or one tear. It happened in pieces, the same way he took my life, quiet, steady, cruel. His legs gave out first. He sank to the floor, shaking, his hands covering his face. I watched him crumble, this man who once called me weak. The same son who shouted that I was a failure, now sat crying in the house built on my grave. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt power, but I didn't. All I felt was exhaustion. My heart didn't have room for revenge. It was too full of pain. Watching your child fall apart is never victory. It's just another kind of death. He kept mumbling, his voice low and broken. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. His face said everything. He had carried the lie too long, 10 years of pretending, smiling, sleeping beside wealth that came from betrayal. His pride had rotted from the inside. Now it was collapsing, right in front of me. His hands shook like a man who'd been poisoned, and in a way, he had been. Not by me, by himself. Greed is a poison that starts sweet and ends like ash. I stood there, looking at him, remembering the boy he used to be. The boy who cried when he scraped his knee. The boy who promised he'd make me proud. I wanted to believe that boy still existed somewhere inside the man on the floor. But maybe he died the day my name did. The day he forged that paper, signed my death, and traded blood for money. There was no pride left in him, no strength, just fear and guilt, and the emptiness of success without peace. The mansion around us looked cold. Marble floors, golden walls, expensive silence. I thought about how long he must have walked these halls pretending to be a good man, pretending to deserve all of it. The sound of his crying bounced off the walls, echoing like a warning. This was what pride does when it's built on lies. It rises fast, high enough to touch heaven, and then it falls hard enough to bury you alive. He was buried now, not in dirt, but in the weight of his own choices. He looked up at me once, eyes red, face wet, and I saw something break in him. The arrogance was gone. The anger, the greed, all gone. What was left was something smaller. Regret. He reached for me, but his hands stopped midair. He couldn't touch me. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he was afraid I would pull away. I didn't move, I just stood there, breathing slowly, my heart aching from everything we had lost that no money could ever buy back. I didn't hate him. I pitied him. That's worse. I thought of all the nights I spent praying for him, hoping he was safe, hoping he was eating well. I imagined him working hard, living honest, remembering the lessons I taught him. Instead, he had spent those same nights counting the money that came from my grave. He thought success would fill the space where love used to be. But standing there, crying like a child, I could see what 10 years of lies had done. It had hollowed him out, made him rich, but ruined. The house felt like a tomb. The lights were bright, but everything inside looked dead. The furniture, the paintings, the expensive floors. All of it meaningless now. It was strange. He had spent so long chasing wealth, and now he sat surrounded by it, wishing he could give it all back. Pride had lifted him up and then crushed him under its weight. That's the punishment of greed. You get everything you wanted, and none of it matters anymore. He kept saying something over and over, voice cracking, tears falling into his hands. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew what he was saying. He was begging the air for forgiveness. Not mine. His own. The kind of forgiveness you can't buy or fake or earn. The kind that haunts you every time you close your eyes. The kind that turns every night into a replay of the day you decided money mattered more than love. And I understood then that he was already paying for what he did. Not with prison. Not with death. But with the kind of guilt that never lets you rest. His pride had collapsed, and now he was just a man sitting in the ruins of his own success. He would never be free. Not from me. Not from himself. And I didn't have to do anything. Life had already punished him in the cruelest way possible, by letting him live long enough to see what his choices turned him into. The plea for mercy. He started begging. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was small, broken, desperate. The sound of a man who finally realized that money couldn't fix what he destroyed. He crawled toward me, his knees scraping against the cold floor, his hands trembling, his face wet. I could see it. The moment he stopped being a rich man and became a frightened boy again. The boy who once held my hand on the way to school. The boy who promised he'd always take care of me when I got old. Now that same boy was on his knees, begging his father not for love, but for mercy. He kept talking, voice shaking, words spilling out too fast. He said he'd give it all back, the money, the house, the land, everything he took. He said he'd make it right. He said he'd undo the papers, fix the lies, clear my name. His voice cracked, his breath came in short bursts, and he pressed his forehead to the floor like a man praying to something he didn't believe in anymore. It was pitiful to watch. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel justice. I felt tired. I had lived long enough to know that guilt doesn't fix what it breaks. I lifted my hand to stop him. It shook, but not from weakness, from the weight of everything I felt. I looked down at him. This grown man who once thought he was untouchable, now shaking like a leaf in front of the father he'd buried for money. I wanted to tell him that I forgave him. I wanted to tell him that it was all right, that I understood. But I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat like stones. Forgiveness wasn't mine to give. He didn't need my mercy. He needed his own. He looked up at me then. Eyes red, lips trembling, waiting for me to say something. Anything. I didn't speak. I just stood there, watching him cry. The silence hurt more than shouting ever could. He reached for my hands, but I pulled them back. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because I could feel his shame through his touch. His fingers were cold and weak. The same hands that once signed my death now begged for my blessing. I couldn't give it. He kept promising things, that he'd sell everything, that he'd move me in, that he'd take care of me. But I didn't believe any of it. Not because I thought he was lying, but because I knew it wouldn't matter. You can't buy back 10 years. You can't rebuild trust from ashes. Once a man decides his father's worth is measured in dollars, he's already lost something no wealth can replace. He wanted to return what he stole. But the real theft wasn't money. It was time. 10 years I'll never get back. 10 years he'll never forgive himself for. I bent down slowly, my knees stiff, my breath uneven, and looked him in the eyes. There was no hate in me anymore, just emptiness. I told him without words that I didn't come for money. I came to see if he still had a heart. What I found was something worse than greed. Regret that came too late. He thought giving me everything back would fix it, that he could trade gold for forgiveness. But forgiveness doesn't work that way. Forgiveness is a burden, not a gift. He begged harder. His voice broke. His body shook. I could feel his desperation. It was real, but it was useless. He had lived too long in comfort to understand that some things can't be undone. He wanted me to release him from his guilt, but guilt doesn't leave just because someone says, "I forgive you." It stays until it eats everything. I looked at him one last time and placed my hand on his shoulder. It wasn't affection. It was farewell. In that touch, he understood. I didn't come to reclaim what he stole. I came to give it back to him. The guilt, the sin, the shame. It was his to carry now, not mine. I had spent 10 years thinking I was the one buried, but now I knew who was truly dead. My son had killed himself long before I ever came back. The man crying in front of me was just the shell of what he used to be. I stood up and looked around his house one last time. Everything was shining, but everything was empty. His words faded into sobs. I didn't speak again. Mercy wasn't what he needed. He needed time to feel every ounce of the pain he gave me. Because that's the only way a man like him learns. Not through forgiveness, but through the slow, heavy weight of his own regret. The father's choice. He kept crawling after me, still begging, still promising, still trying to trade his guilt for peace. I could hear his voice breaking behind me, but I didn't turn around. I stood there, watching his hands shake as he pushed a stack of papers toward me. Property deeds, bank forms, inheritance transfers, all the proof of what he stole. His voice cracked as he said he'd sign it all back to me. I didn't need to hear the words. I could see the desperation in the way he held the papers, like they were his last hope. I looked down at them for a long time, the ink, the numbers, the seals, everything he took from me, now being shoved back into my hands, as if that would fix what he'd done. I reached out, not to take them, but to push them back toward him. My fingers trembled, but my eyes stayed on his. I didn't want what he was giving. I didn't want the money. I didn't want the house. I didn't want to take back the blood he turned into gold. I told him with my silence that some things aren't meant to be returned. What would I do with his guilt? What would I do with the proof of his crime? I was too old to start over, too tired to rebuild. The things he stole didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was what was left of his soul. And even that looked broken beyond repair. He tried again, sliding the papers closer, whispering about fairness, about making it right. But fairness doesn't exist in betrayal. Once a man decides his father's death is a price worth paying, fairness is gone forever. He thought returning the money would erase the sin, but it doesn't work like that. Money can fix walls, not hearts. You can repair a house, but not the man who built it. You can't buy forgiveness, and you can't sell peace. He didn't understand that yet. He still believed everything had a price. I left the papers on the floor. They didn't belong to me anymore. They belonged to him. To the man who buried his father for profit. To the man who would now live knowing every coin he earned came from a lie I didn't need to take his wealth. I wanted him to keep it. I wanted him to wake up every day and see what it cost. I wanted him to live in the prison he built with his own hands, not bars, not chains, just memory. That's the real punishment, the kind that never ends. He kept staring at me, tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking with confusion. He didn't understand what I was doing, but I did. I was choosing peace, not revenge. Revenge would have been easy. I could have taken everything, dragged his name through the dirt, made him pay in ways the world would see. But peace is harder. Peace is walking away, knowing justice won't fill the hole in your heart. I wasn't there to destroy him. I was there to leave him with the truth. The truth that his father came back not to collect money, but to remind him what he lost when he chose greed over love. I looked around that house one more time. Every wall looked colder now, every shadow longer. I saw the ghost of who he could have been. The good son, the proud man, The child who once hugged me tight after falling and said he'd never let go. That boy was gone. He had traded himself away for numbers and paper, and now all that was left was a man drowning in everything he thought he wanted. I told him in my silence that this was his burden to keep. The wealth, the guilt, the empty victory. I would not take it back. I didn't want to carry what he created. I wanted him to. Because guilt can't be passed like inheritance. It stays where it belongs, inside the heart of the one who earned it. When I finally turned toward the door, I felt something heavy leave me. Not forgiveness, not anger, just weight. The kind of weight that comes from realizing there's nothing left to say, nothing left to fix, nothing left to love. He called after me. His voice cracked, but I didn't look back. I had made my choice. I didn't come to reclaim my life. I came to give his back to him, broken, stained, and heavy with truth. And that was enough. The final goodbye. I stepped out of that house slowly. The air outside felt heavy and cold, but cleaner than the air inside. My legs were weak, but I kept walking. I didn't look back. I could still hear him behind me, calling out, his voice cracking, breaking, falling apart in the distance. He sounded small again, like the boy who once cried when he lost sight of me in a crowd. But this time, I didn't turn around to find him. This time, I kept walking. The road in front of me was empty, gray, quiet. It matched how I felt inside, hollow, done, finished. The sound of the door closing behind me echoed like the last nail in a coffin. That house wasn't mine. That sun wasn't mine. Not anymore. The wind was sharp against my face. My coat was thin, my shoes old, but I didn't care. I had lived 10 years thinking I was dead. Maybe I was. Maybe what walked out of that house was only what was left of a man who tried to love someone who no longer knew what love meant. I passed the gate, and the guards looked away. They didn't ask questions. Maybe they knew. Maybe they'd always known. That I wasn't a ghost coming back. I was a mistake coming home. As I reached the street, I turned once, not to see him, but to look at the house one last time. The lights were still bright, the windows clean, but now it looked like a tomb, expensive, quiet, filled with the kind of silence that eats people alive. I thought about all the nights he must have walked through those rooms, haunted by what he'd done. He probably told himself I was gone, that I'd never find out. But guilt has a way of knocking when you least expect it, and when it knocks, it never leaves. I walked farther down the road, past the gates, past the city noise, past everything that reminded me of him. My chest hurt with every step, but it wasn't from age. It was from what I'd lost, not just a son, but the belief that love could survive anything. It can't. Sometimes love dies quietly, not from time, not from distance, but from choice. He made that choice 10 years ago when he decided that money was worth more than the man who raised him. That choice killed something in both of us. The sky started turning dark. The streetlights flickered on. I stopped for a moment under one of them and looked at my hands. Old, wrinkled, tired. The same hands that once built a home for him now hung useless at my sides. I thought about how strange it was, how a man can give his whole life to his child and still end up being nothing more than a shadow. That's the cruelty of being a father. You give and give until there's nothing left to take, and still, it's never enough. Behind me, his voice kept echoing in my mind. Not the words, just the sound. The sound of regret. The sound of someone realizing too late that they traded love for emptiness. I didn't need to turn around to know he was crying. I could feel it. I could feel the house shaking with it. But I couldn't go back. Some things can't be fixed by tears. Some wounds heal only when you stop trying to close them. I reached the bus stop. My body ached. My breath came slow. but I felt lighter than I had in years. I had walked into that house carrying 10 years of pain, and I walked out carrying nothing, not hate, not forgiveness, just truth. That's all I wanted, to see what kind of man my son became. And I did. Now I could leave, knowing I didn't fail him. He failed himself. The bus came, loud and old, and I climbed in. I sat by the window and looked out at the road ahead. The lights from his house faded behind me until they disappeared completely. For a moment, I thought about the little boy he used to be, the one who held my hand and promised he'd make me proud. I whispered a goodbye under my breath, not to him, but to the memory of who he once was. Then I closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Some tears dry up after too many years of disappointment. I just sat there, feeling the bus move, taking me farther from the past I had seen the truth. And that was enough. The man who opened that door wasn't my son anymore. He was just a stranger with my blood, trapped in a golden cage he built himself, and I, the father he buried, had finally come back only to walk away again. This time, for good. The aftermath. That night, the city slept, but not him. I didn't see it, but I knew. I could feel it. The kind of silence that follows truth is heavy. It sinks into walls, into air, into the skin. The neighbors said later they heard him shouting. Some said he cried. Some said he smashed a glass. Some said they heard footsteps pacing the floors till morning. I didn't need to be there to know what it sounded like. I knew that sound well. It was the sound of guilt trying to breathe. The sound of a man realizing that all his riches couldn't buy back a father's peace. They said the lights in his mansion stayed on all night. They said he didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't speak. The servants whispered that he sat on the floor of his office, holding the same papers I pushed back at him, just staring at them. Maybe he read every line, every signature, every fake word that had buried me. Maybe he finally saw what those papers truly were. A confession written in ink, his own grave, carved with numbers. I imagined him there, surrounded by gold and marble, shaking in the dark, haunted by the ghost of the man he tried to erase. It's strange what guilt does to people. It doesn't kill fast. It eats slow. It starts in the chest, then spreads through the mind. Every sound becomes a memory. Every silence becomes a voice. Every shadow looks like a figure you hoped would never return. That's what I wanted for him. Not death, not punishment. Just awareness. I wanted him to wake up every morning and remember that his father's heart still beat somewhere. Not out of love, but out of truth. I wanted him to see my face every time he looked in the mirror. I wanted him to carry me the way I carried him all those years. Except mine would be heavier. Mine would never leave. A few days later, I heard from an old neighbor that he stopped leaving the house. The servants quit one by one. His wife took the children and left no fight, no words, just gone. She must have found out. Maybe she saw the papers. Maybe she saw what kind of man she'd been living beside. Money can hide a lot, but not everything. When truth cracks the walls, it spreads fast. By the end of the week, he was alone. Just him, his guilt, and the house built on his father's grave. I didn't visit again. I didn't need to. I didn't want to see him rot. I wanted to let him feel what I felt for 10 years. Isolation. The silence of being forgotten. The ache of living when everyone thinks you're dead. That's what he gave me, and that's what I left him with. I didn't need to lift a hand. Life does its own punishing. Slowly. Perfectly. The papers never changed names again. The money stayed his. The house stayed his. Everything stayed his. That's how I wanted it. Because every brick, every coin, every piece of that fortune was a reminder. A mirror that showed him what he did every single day. He could keep it all, but he'd never own peace again. That's what guilt takes first. Peace. Some nights, when I couldn't sleep, I thought of him sitting in that cold house, the echo of his own footsteps following him from room to room. I thought of him hearing my voice in every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside. I thought of him sitting at his grand table, staring at the empty chair across from him, seeing me there. That was his punishment. No judge, no jury, no sentence. Just a lifetime of seeing the man he killed and knowing he did it to himself. $5 million. That's what my life was worth to him. $5 million to erase me. $5 million to buy comfort, respect, success. But $5 million couldn't buy him rest. It couldn't buy him sleep. It couldn't buy him back his soul. I didn't have to curse him. He cursed himself. Every man who betrays love does. They say he barely speaks now, that he walks the halls at night like a ghost, that he keeps my photo on his desk but never looks at it for long, that sometimes he whispers apologies to no one. I believe it, because guilt never leaves. It only grows old with you, like a shadow that refuses to fade. He buried me once with lies, but now, every night, he's the one who hears the shovel scraping the dirt. Not outside, inside. That's the sound of truth. That's the sound of the dead coming back. Not to haunt, but to remind. A father's peace. I live quietly now. Far from the noise, far from the city, far from the house that used to carry my name. I rent a small room near the edge of town. The walls are thin, the bed is hard, and the nights are long, but I don't mind. I have peace here. The kind of peace that doesn't come from money or comfort. The kind that comes when you finally stop expecting anything from anyone. I wake up before the sun, make a small cup of tea, and sit by the window watching the world move without me. It's simple, it's empty, but it's honest. After what I've seen, honesty feels like a blessing. I don't think of him every day anymore. Only sometimes, when the wind hits a certain way, or when I pass a father walking with his son. That's when the ache starts again. Quiet, dull, familiar. It doesn't burn like it used to. It just sits there, heavy but calm. Time doesn't heal everything. Some wounds stay. They stop bleeding, but they don't close. I've learned to live with that. The truth is, forgiveness isn't about setting someone free. It's about setting yourself free from the need to understand why they hurt you. Some people hurt because they can. Some people hurt because it's easier than facing what they've become. I've grown old in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't ask questions anymore. I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped waiting for him to find me. Maybe one day he will. Maybe one day he won't. It doesn't matter. I left everything behind, the papers, the past, even my name. I don't need them anymore. What would I do with revenge? It doesn't change the years I lost. It doesn't bring back the love that died. It doesn't fix a heart that's already learned to live cracked. I chose peace, not because I'm strong, but because I was tired of being broken. Sometimes I think about death, but it doesn't scare me. I already lived it once, when my own son buried me with lies. Everything after that was extra time, borrowed time, a second chance to see the world for what it really is. Not fair, not kind, not forgiving, just real. And real is enough for me now. I walk slowly. I eat little. I sleep early. My body is weak, but my mind is quiet. That's more than I ever had before. They say when you get old, you start counting the people who remember you. I stopped counting. I don't need anyone to remember me. I lived my life, I made my choices, and I paid my prices. My son will live with his. That's the balance of things. I don't wish him harm. I don't wish him peace either. I just wish him truth. Because truth is heavier than punishment. Truth doesn't let you run. It stays behind your eyes, inside your breath, in every heartbeat that reminds you of what you've done. That's the gift I left him with. The truth of who he became. Every sunrise reminds me that forgiveness is heavier than revenge. People think forgiveness is soft, gentle, easy. It isn't. It's cruel. It makes you remember everything and still choose to let it go. It leaves you with silence, not closure. But it's the only way to stop being chained to what broke you. I forgave my son not to save him, but to save myself. I had carried enough weight. It was time to put it down. Now I walk to the park some mornings. I sit on the same bench every time. I watch children play, fathers laugh, mothers call their kids home. Life moves on. It doesn't care who's missing or who's hurting. That's the truth of it. The world doesn't stop for your pain. It never did for mine. But I keep watching anyway, because somewhere in all that noise, there's still something beautiful. Maybe not for me, but for them. And that's enough. I was buried once for money, but I lived long enough to bury the hate. That's my peace. I don't need more. I don't want more. I just sit here, breathing, waiting for the day my body finally catches up to the grave my son wrote for me. Until then, I'll keep waking up, drinking my tea, and watching the sun rise over a world that forgot me. And maybe that's how it's supposed to be, because some ghosts don't haunt. They just sit quietly, remembering, not in anger, but in truth.